situation. Deliver me from sinking into the mire. Let me be delivered from my enemies and from the deep waters. Verse 18, draw near to my soul. Redeem me, ransom me because of my enemies. And then come verses 22 to 28. And they are entirely imprecations or prayers that his enemies be cursed. God's enemies, his enemies, that the full force of God's judgment fall on them, that they not be acquitted. Verse 22. Let their table before them become a snare. In other words, when they sit down to eat, may their supper table be a trap. And when they are at peace, let it become a trap. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and make their loins tremble continually. Pour out your indignation upon them, and let your burning anger overtake them. And then he closes with a cry for help. Verse 29. But I'm afflicted in pain. Let your salvation, O God, set me on high. I will praise the name of God with a song. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. So here's the summary. David is not a perfect man. He confesses that in verse 5. He is a righteous man. He implies that in verse 28. He's a man who loves the glory of God. He trusts God's mercy for ransom and redemption that he needs. He stands up for the cause of the humble, verses 32 and 33. And he's suffering undeserved persecution because he's standing with God, and the enemies of God are making him their enemy as well. And in the middle of all of that, lament and cry for help. 7 verses are devoted to crying down the judgment of God on these people. There's the song. Now, what does the New Testament make of this? Well, the first thing we should see, we've noted already, let me say it again, is that in all of its quotations, and this psalm is quoted as much as any in its extent, not as many times, but more of it, I believe. In its quoting, it's never embarrassed by this psalm, ever. Not a hint that, we need to correct this psalm, or be embarrassed by this psalm, or be critical of this psalm, or leave it behind and get beyond it. The New Testament never treats it as a sinful, personal vengeance. So, we learn from the New Testament that, and this is what we should expect, given what we saw in the first message, that Jesus regards the Psalms as inspired by God, and therefore this psalm is holy. I was naive at age 25 and easily shockable theologically. And in Germany, was in a conference and in a seminar with a big square table. I can just see it. I was so jolted by this moment of my studies. And sitting around that table were high-level scholars from all over Germany. I had never seen real Bible-rejecting theological liberalism in action. I had only read about it. And I was there as an observer, graduate student. And in the discussion, one fairly innocent young man quoted one of the imprecatory psalms to make a point. And across the table, he was sitting about that angle from me, a well-known scholar got this look on his face and simply burst out, "Das ist doch ein Pharisäerpsalm." That is a Pharisee psalm. Clearly implying, don't ever quote that psalm around us. Don't ever quote those psalms around me. You leave those out. That's what liberalism is. It leaves out parts of the Bible. It is liberal in the sense that it feels free to do what it pleases with God's Word. I sat there just almost trembling. I had never in public heard Bible scholars treat the Bible that way. It's much more subtle in evangelicalism. But there it was not subtle. And inside, everything in me said, I'm here studying to teach the Bible. Oh God, never, never, never let me go there. Never let me be influenced by this kind of blasphemy. And I think, I pray, I hope that He has protected me and will yet. So the New Testament would not have approved of that attitude. Das ist doch ein Pharisäer-Psalm. The New Testament quotes this psalm in two ways, mainly. There are other ways, one other way, but we'll just take two, the main two. It quotes this psalm as words of David, and it quotes this psalm as words of Jesus. Let's take those one at a time and see what they imply for us. Number one, I'm going to go to Romans 11. This is the longest quote of the psalm in the New Testament. The psalm that's quoted, I'll read the psalm first and we'll go look at it in Romans 11. The psalm goes like this in verses 22 to 23. Let their table before them become a snare, and when they are at peace, let it become a trap. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and make their loins tremble continually. Now, that's what Paul read, and Paul quoted the entirety of it in Romans 11. So he's praying, the psalmist is praying that their food become poison for them and kill them. That their table be an undoing, that their bounty, which they think is good, prove to be their judgment, and that they be blinded so that they cannot see and escape judgment. That's what he's praying would happen to these adversaries of God and himself. Especially, look at verses, you're in Romans, I'm still looking at the psalm for right now, verse 27, second half of the verse. May they have no acquittal from you. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living. Let them not be enrolled among the righteous. So clearly, he's praying for their damnation. Okay? Now, you would think that if this prayer is a sinful, personal vengeance, that the Apostle Paul would at least avoid it and possibly correct it, and you get exactly the opposite. Not only in chapter 11, but in chapter 15 as well. So in building Romans, he goes to this psalm twice, not just once, and he goes there significantly and not just accidentally. He does just the opposite. He runs to this psalm, not away from it, and he goes straight to the hardest part of the psalm for us. Now here's what's going on in Romans 11. Think back several years. I know there's no use in you thinking back several years, but we were there once upon a time in Romans 11. And what he's doing is saying that by and large, the mass of ethnic Israel has rejected Jesus as the Messiah. What is God's response to that? And his response is to give them over for a season to hardening until the full number of the Gentiles comes in. That's the point of Romans 11 in large measure. The Jewish people, not all of them by any means, and we should be evangelizing Jews all the time, in the hopes that God, if by any means, might save some. That's what Paul laid his life down. My prayer to God for them is that they might be saved, he said in chapter 10, verse 1. And he spent his life going to synagogue after synagogue after synagogue, preaching the gospel, and we should do the same to every Jewish person we know with great love and sacrifice. However, the Bible teaches In Romans 11,